They figured a noise complaint would scare me off, but they had no clue who they were messing with. When Karen and the HOA torched my Ferrari in my own driveway, they thought they'd made their point. They had no idea they'd just burned the car belonging to the very man who owned their homes. It started when Karen, leading the HOA charge, introduced a new rule targeting loud and disruptive vehicles under the guise of protecting community peace. It was clearly aimed at cars like mine, my Ferrari, perfectly tuned and complaint-free for years. The rule demanded special approval for anything above a certain decibel level. While neighbors quietly adapted, I didn't budge. I filed for the so-called permit. It was denied within hours, no real reason given. I showed up at the HOA meeting, ready to challenge it. Karen sat there, smug, rattling off rules she'd clearly tailored just for me. "We must protect the peace," she said, smugly. "We can't make exceptions for luxury toys." I countered. My car was legal, parked properly, and broke no actual laws. Karen shut me down. "Rules are rules," she snapped. "If you don't like them, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." I could hear the murmurs around me. This wasn't about noise, it was about control. About Karen flexing her tiny power trip. But she didn't realize I wasn't just a resident with a flashy car. I was the hidden owner of the very development she thought she ruled. I kept my cool. I didn't give in. I kept driving, kept parking exactly where I was allowed. I followed every rule to the letter. Karen escalated. One night, too tired to pull into the garage, I left the Ferrari in the driveway. Hours later, I woke up to chaos. The sound of metal smashing. I rushed to the window. Karen and her crew were outside, bats and tire irons in hand, tearing into my car like maniacs. And then, they lit it on fire. Karen, holding a lighter, looked right at me and dropped it on the hood. Flames roared. My car turned into an inferno. She crossed her arms, smirking. "Guess it's not a problem anymore," she said. "Should have followed the rules." I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding, but silent. Watching, remembering. Because Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life. She didn't know I was the one who owned everything. The streets, the homes, the yard she patrolled like a tyrant. The next morning, I stood by the ashes of my Ferrari. Fire department gone. Police took notes. Karen played the concerned neighbor card. No cameras. No witnesses. But I didn't need them. She had no idea I wasn't just another homeowner battling her petty vendettas. I was the landlord of the entire HOA-run neighborhood. Through layered LLCs and shell companies, I owned nearly every house. Their mortgages? Mine. Their manicured lawns? Mine. Even the sidewalks beneath their flip-flops? Mine. For years, I'd built this from the shadows. Karen never bothered to dig deeper. She assumed power came with a clipboard and a rulebook. She was wrong. Now it was time to show her who she had just crossed. And I hadn't even started yet. I could see her from my office window, laughing it up with her fellow HOA board members, smirking every time she strolled past my place. They figured I was done for, humiliated, broken by the loss of my Ferrari. But I'm not the kind of man to sulk over one loss. I'm the kind of man who hits back 10 times harder. And I had the perfect plan. First thing, I got my legal team on the line. I had them pull every HOA agreement, every property file, every lease ever signed under my various LLCs. I told them to comb through it all, looking for anything out of line. And just as I suspected, they found more than enough. Misused HOA money, bogus expense reports, phony fines, and personal security bills charged to community funds. The financial mess alone was enough to bury the HOA in debt. But I wasn't stopping there. I wanted Karen ruined. Personally. So I dug deeper. Thanks to my real estate firm, I had access to every mortgage in the area. And when my team ran Karen's info, we found gold. Her home wasn't even paid off. Worse, she'd been funneling HOA funds to cover parts of her mortgage, masking them as maintenance costs and improvement initiatives. If that got out, she wouldn't just lose her role. She'd lose her house. And with that, I got to work. The next morning, every single homeowner in the neighborhood received an official letter from my attorneys. It outlined massive financial abuse by the HOA board, the illegal siphoning of dues, and the upcoming foreclosures, including Karen's. People were livid. The community forum exploded with posts demanding answers about where their fees had gone. Karen tried to spin it like always, posting some predictable, "This is an attack on our community's values" garbage. But it was too late. The proof was public. Receipts were everywhere. Suddenly, Karen didn't look like a well-meaning leader. She looked like a crook. The real fireworks came at the emergency meeting. Karen showed up disheveled, clearly rattled, calling for a vote to dismiss the allegations and begging the community to stand together. But the residents weren't having it. One by one, they stood up, venting about the shady charges, the lies, the years of abuse. Some demanded their money back. Others called for her immediate resignation. And then the moment I'll never forget, an elderly couple slammed a civil suit on the table, suing Karen personally for fraud. She tried to explain it all away, claimed it was a big mix-up, but you could see it in her eyes. She knew she was done. Still, I wasn't finished. As the room spiraled into chaos, I stood and held up a thick folder. "I think it's time you all learned the truth," I said, voice steady. Everyone went quiet. "You've been living under the illusion that this HOA owns your homes, runs your lives. But that's not true." I placed the folder on the table, open to the last page. It was all there, proof of ownership. Through a series of acquisitions, my companies now held title to over 80% of the land and homes here, including the rental units and every undeveloped lot. Bottom line, I didn't just live here. I owned it. You could hear a pin drop. Karen, who'd been shouting moments earlier, went pale. The realization hit her hard, that the man she'd been tormenting controlled her entire fate. I let it sit for a beat. Then came the final strike. Effective immediately, the HOA is disbanded. All fines and dues are void. And Karen, I smiled. Since you paid your mortgage with stolen HOA money, now seized under fraud investigation, you've got 30 days to vacate. Because I'm evicting you. The room exploded. Cheers, laughter, stunned silence. Some people were in tears. Karen just stood there, frozen, her jaw working but no words coming. Her little empire, gone. That night, I sipped whiskey on my balcony, watching her load boxes into a rental truck, trying to avoid the neighbors' glares. She glanced up at my house one last time. I raised my glass. Checkmate. The woman who torched my Ferrari and thought she ran the show was gone. But with her out and the HOA dismantled, the real chaos was only beginning. The neighborhood, still reeling from the collapse of their petty little regime, was split. Some folks were overjoyed, glad to finally breathe without the weight of Karen's bogus fines and overreach. Others, a little jittery, unsure what the future held without someone barking orders. Without the HOA in charge, people actually worried about things like lawn maintenance, home values, and, funniest of all, whether someone might actually paint their mailbox hot pink. I reassured them. The neighborhood would be fine. Just under my rules now. I wasn't about to let it all slide into chaos, but I sure as hell wasn't letting another tin pot dictator rise either. My real estate firm drafted new community standards, real ones. Fair, enforceable, legally sound. No more power plays dressed up as policy. But just as I started putting the new system in place, something caught me off guard. Karen hadn't vanished. Not even close. Turns out, she'd been plotting. Through my contacts in property management, I discovered she'd been cozying up to a local developer, trying to trade in what little influence she had left. She'd already filed paperwork to launch a brand new HOA under a different name, targeting a nearby development. That's when I realized this wasn't about a fresh start. It was a comeback tour, and I wasn't going to let her rebuild her little empire. So, I dug deeper. I had my legal team revisit everything we'd uncovered in the last HOA debacle. The public lawsuit was already embarrassing, but I wanted more. I wanted finality. What we found was worse than expected. She hadn't just dipped into HOA dues. She'd built a maze of shady deals, shell companies, and dirty money, all linked to family members who were now propping up her next HOA attempt. This was bigger than booting her from a neighborhood. This was about making sure she never held authority again. I called in a favor from someone at the state attorney's office. With everything my legal team had gathered, fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, we built a solid case. The state moved fast. They froze her accounts, seized her luxury SUV, and even took back the rental she was hiding in. When the arrest hit the news, it was glorious. Local headlines lit up. Ex-HOA president indicted for fraud. Luxury lifestyle funded by stolen HOA fees. The same neighbors she once terrorized? They were loving it. But the cherry on top? She didn't see it coming. I happened to be driving through downtown when it happened. She was outside a cafe, smug as ever, when an unmarked police car pulled up. Two plainclothes officers approached. I parked across the street and watched. She looked confused at first, then panicked. She waved her arms, denied everything, but the cuffs said otherwise. As they put her in the back seat, she spotted me. And she knew. She knew I was the reason. And I smiled. By the time trial rolled around, she was a shadow of the woman who once marched the neighborhood like she owned it. Sitting at the defense table, she scrambled to explain herself. But the receipts don't lie. Every shady deal, every dollar stolen, every abuse of power, it all came out. When the guilty verdict dropped, I swear you could hear the whole block cheering from miles away. She got 5 years. Not a life sentence, but more than enough. Enough to kill her credibility. Enough to end her grip on control. Enough to break her. The community moved on. Instead of rebuilding the same flawed structure, I created a homeowners advisory board. Not a ruling council, just folks offering guidance and resources. No ridiculous fines. No micromanaging nonsense. Just common sense policies and mutual respect. Property values didn't dip, they climbed. People actually wanted to live here now. And me? I bought a new Ferrari. Better engine. Louder exhaust. And every time I drove it past Karen's old place, I made sure to rev it. Just loud enough to remind the block exactly who came out on top.